Michael Tracey is an independent journalist who's already on the road covering the presidential race, and he joins us tonight from an undisclosed location. So, Michael Tracey, you're one of the very few people who has noted this weird nexus between news outlets and retired intelligence officials. It seems like a very unhealthy arrangement to me. Do you think that it is?
I think it's unhealthy, and I think it will contribute to a fundamental inability for the media to self-reflect on what it got so horrendously wrong throughout this episode. I mean, if John Brennan is a colleague of yours at a different network, then that might disincentivize you to do a thorough audit of the practices which led to such a false impression being conveyed across the airways about what this story actually entailed. You know, this past week we marked the anniversary of the Iraq invasion, and since then, all the top media promoters of that invasion have ascended to high levels of power and influence. I could name a couple, many of whom, frankly, appear on this network on occasion.
True. No, you're right.
But
one of them is the national security advisor of the United States right now. So, yes, I'm
exactly,
aware.
John. I mean, if I could speak to President Trump, I would ask him, why did you appoint John Bolton, one of the main promoters of the Iraq War, to be your national security advisor when you've said multiple times that the Iraq War was a disaster? But that's a digression. The point is that this Trump-Russia story is a media failure of comparable magnitude. Less death, thankfully, but just as much just total inability, total factual indiscretion.
Yes.
And I feel like something similar is going to happen where the people who were proven decisively wrong and were proven to have deceived the American people for 2+ years, now we're approaching 3 years actually, they're not going to pay any price. They're not going to face any consequence. If you or I or normal people failed at their job miserably, they would probably, I don't know, get demoted, maybe even fired. They would suffer some kind of reputational consequence, but not so for the media elite who have been leading the charge of this story, who had a lot of influence on these security state officials like Andrew McCabe, who launched the one of the investigations into Trump at the FBI. You know, listen to Andrew McCabe on his recent book tour. It almost sounds like he's a devoted reader of David Frum at The Atlantic, who's Frum, you know, he worked for George W. Bush. He helped coin the axis of evil phrase. He was a leading advocate for the Iraq War. He's also a leading advocate of Russiagate. There's a lot of crossover there. And, you know, but Andrew McCabe seemed like he was just scrolling through Twitter or like reading the New York Times or something. He didn't have any privileged information that we know of that led him to launch these unprecedented investigations into the democratically
that's actually
elected president.
I want to finish out this segment with this question to you, and you got right to it. So I think it was yesterday, former FBI Director Jim Comey wrote an op-ed in which he basically predicted what we found out tonight. No indictments, no collusion. So the obvious suggestion is that Jim Comey has some kind of inside source in the Mueller investigation. Shouldn't that shake the faith that all of us have in our institutions?
Well, I mean, knowing that Comey led that institution for so long has already shaken the faiths of many people, such that this column, I don't think, is going to make a huge difference. But, you know, let me just say one more thing, Tucker. I mean, I'm happy to disclose my location. It's New Hampshire, where the presidential candidates are campaigning. And the Democratic presidential candidates have totally beclowned themselves on this issue because they've, in large part, adopted the most maximalist interpretation of what the Trump-Russia conspiracy consisted of, irrespective of, skeptics saying, let's exercise some caution here. Let's not leap to conclusions. The one exception, and the candidate that I'm covering this week is Tulsi Gabbard, who just last week said something to the effect of the people who have been calling Trump Russia's puppet have actually distracted from the reality that Trump has actually contradicted much of his campaign rhetoric and taken aggressive actions toward Russia. And that's what Democrats should have been emphasizing this entire time, rather than going down this global, this conspiracy rabbit hole.
And for her to say that is an act of real bravery right now. Michael Tracey, thanks very much for joining us tonight. Good to see you.
Thanks.
Probably nobody has covered the story more closely than Kimberly Strassel of the Wall Street Journal, and we're happy to have her on tonight to help make sense of what we know now. Kim, what do you think we know now? I mean, from the limited data that we have at this point, what are you concluding?
So a couple of things that some of your prior guests have pointed. One, the important thing is it is done. 2 years on, and that matters for a couple of reasons, because it's not just the fact that it removes this cloud hanging over Washington, but it also enables the president to do a lot of things that he's been constrained from doing, right? Because every time he would go and contemplate a certain action, they would say, you can't do that. You're obstructing the Mueller probe. That is now removed, and that will change the dynamic in D.C. So that is one. Two, no indictments, and obviously Molly Hemingway went through why that's important. Three, I think another thing that's been overlooked. You know, Attorney General Bill Barr sent a letter to Congress, and he pointed out, as he is required to do under special counsel guidelines, that he had no cause at any point to overrule any of Mueller's decisions in the end. So that puts to paid the other vast conspiracy theory going around the last couple of years, that somehow Mueller was never going to be able to complete his work, that obviously there would be political interference. Somebody, remember everyone saying we needed to have legislation in Congress to protect the special counsel? He was never at any risk of that. And basically that Barr transmission proves it. It also suggests, reading the tea leaves, that perhaps the Mueller report is pretty straight up if Bill Barr didn't feel that there was anything he had to intervene on.
How much of these, I'm just so struck that a huge number of these conspiracy theories seem to bubble up from social media, Twitter especially, and then emerge from the mouths of elected officials, supposedly responsible people. I mean, how baroque and complex is this conspiracy world that a lot of the left lives in right now?
Well, you make a great point. We should have been done with this. We should have finished all of this and had a conclusion more than a year ago, when our congressional committees, after months and months of diligent work, admitted that they could find no evidence to support any of the claims that people had made on the other side. And if you just step back from that, we also should have known from the work that Robert Mueller was doing himself. Look, court case after court case dealing with the central figures here, none of which in any of the filings, any of the court documents, had any reference to any of the main collusion conspiracy theories that have been out there. And if anyone had taken a deep breath, this would have all been very obvious some time ago. But there is an entire industry, and you mentioned some congressmen, you mentioned the media, that have an interest in riling this up every day as a way to delegitimize this presidency, and not just his presidency, but his agenda as well, too, which is a very clever way of doing it. You say the guy at the very top is corrupt, and therefore everything he is doing is corrupt. So there's a political advantage for them having done this all these years.
And they have pressed that advantage. Kimberly Strassel, thanks so much for that. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you.